Contra, a fan novelization. Like the video and subscribe for more video game novelizations such as this. Prologue, 2633 AD. The message arrived without warning, transmitted on every secure channel of the United Earth Government's High Command network. It bypassed encryption, firewalls, and security layers as if they weren't even there. The transmission was simple, an audio file, garbled at first, but then a voice emerged, inhuman yet eerily articulate. "We have been watching you. We are here. We are Red Falcon." The voice carried an unsettling quality, like layered frequencies speaking in unison, an intelligence beyond anything human. Then the message cut off, replaced by a series of symbols, pulsating like a heartbeat across the screen. Within the hour, the world's most powerful leaders had gathered in the UEG's War Council chamber, a vast underground complex deep beneath the North American continent. The air was tense, thick with unease. Holographic displays flickered with data, satellite images, intercepted signals, and centuries-old reports of anomalies that had never been explained. Supreme Chancellor Everett leaned forward, his lined face illuminated by the cold glow of the display. "We need confirmation. Is this a hoax, or is this," he hesitated, as if struggling to say the words, "extraterrestrial"? General Marcus Graves, head of Earth's military forces, exhaled sharply. "It's possible. We've suspected something for years. Strange disturbances in the Galuga archipelago. Unidentified objects moving at impossible speeds. But this message," he gestured at the screen. "It means they aren't hiding anymore." The council chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. For centuries, humanity had expanded, colonized, and warred among themselves. Red Falcon had been a minor rebellious threat for years, but if they have banded with something new, if they had been watching. Everett turned to his advisors. Options. Dr. Helena Kessler, Chief of Extraterrestrial Research, adjusted her glasses. "If we are truly dealing with an alien threat, we have no idea what their capabilities are, but if they're this advanced, diplomacy might not even be an option." Graves folded his arms. "Then we prepare for war." The silence was deafening. The world had faced countless threats, but this was different. This wasn't a rogue nation, a rebellion, or even a war for resources. This was to prevent an invasion. The council chamber, already thick with tension, erupted into heated debate. "We cannot afford to be reckless," Ambassador Lee snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. "If they have been watching us for so long, then they already understand our capabilities. Charging into conflict blindly could mean extinction." General Graves scowled. "And waiting with our hands tied will guarantee it. They aren't making demands. They're making a declaration. You don't send a message like this unless you're preparing for action." Chancellor Everett raised a hand to quiet them. "We will not let this devolve into chaos." He turned to Dr. Kessler. "What do we know about their technology?" Kessler hesitated, then pulled up the intercepted data on the main screen. "The patterns in their transmission, these symbols, aren't just a language. They're some kind of strategic encoding. Every pulse carries data on energy signatures, planetary defenses, even troop deployments. In other words, this wasn't just a warning." She exhaled. "It was a tactical scan. They're gathering final intelligence before moving." Graves leaned forward. "Then we have our answer. We need to act now. We still don't know their intentions." Lee countered. "This could be a test, a way to see how we respond. If we attack first, we might trigger a war that could have been avoided." Graves shook his head. "There is no smite about it. This is a war. The argument escalated, voices overlapping, tempers flaring. Some called for immediate military action, others pleaded for diplomatic outreach. It was only when a quiet voice cut through the chaos that the room fell still. "We have a contingency plan," Defense Minister Albrecht said, his words measured. Something that was designed for a moment just like this. A few council members exchanged glances, as if they already knew what he was about to say. Graves turned to him. "You mean the Contra unit?" Albrecht nodded. "A classified division within the Earth Marine Corps. Small, elite, and trained for the absolute worst-case scenarios." He tapped a few keys, bringing up a new file on the display. 2 dossiers appeared, side by side, one marked Sergeant Bill Rizer, the other Sergeant Lance Bean. "These men are the best we have," Albrecht continued. "Special operations, counterinsurgency, deep insertion tactics. They've trained for every possible scenario." His gaze swept the room. "And now, we may have found the impossible one." A heavy silence followed. Everett steepled his fingers. "You're proposing we send 2 men to face an unknown enemy force?" Graves exhaled, but there was something almost like a grim smile on his face. "Not 2 men, Chancellor. 2 Contras." Chapter 1. Bill Rizer wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned back against the rusted tailgate of his truck. The setting sun bathed the coastline in molten gold, waves rolling in with a steady rhythm, the kind of quiet that most men would kill for. But for Bill, it was just another reminder that he didn't belong here. The beach was nearly empty, just a handful of locals and a few off-duty soldiers from the nearby base. He'd spent the last few months drifting between jobs, taking contract work where he could find it. Today, it was unloading cargo at a dockside warehouse. Tomorrow, maybe fixing engines or moving freight. It didn't matter. It was just something to keep his hands busy, to burn the hours. He took a swig from his water bottle and glanced at the small radio sitting beside him. The broadcast crackled, barely cutting through the hum of the ocean breeze. Another skirmish in the outer colonies, rising tensions along the Venusian trade routes, officials calling for diplomatic intervention. Bill scoffed. The world had changed, but the bullshit never did. People still thought war could be solved with talking, with treaties written on paper. He knew better. He'd seen what happened when men like him were sent in to clean up the mess. He reached into the truck's cab and pulled out a battered cigar case. It had been a gift from an old squadmate, long gone now. He rolled the cigar between his fingers but didn't light it. Just another habit, another way to pass the time. The buzz of his communit cut through the air, its tone sharper than the usual calls. Bill frowned. No one called him anymore, at least, no one who mattered. He flipped it open and brought it to his ear. "Rizer." A pause. Then a voice, low and steady. "Report to Central Command." Immediately. Bill didn't need to ask who it was. The message was clear. No details. No explanations. Just an order. He stared out at the horizon for a moment longer, then exhaled and flicked the unlit cigar back into the case. "On my way." He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and pulled onto the road, leaving the quiet behind. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be simple. It never was. The halls of Central Command hadn't changed. Same sterile steel walls, same harsh fluorescent lighting, same sense of urgency humming beneath the surface. Bill walked through the security checkpoint, the armed guards barely giving him a second glance before letting him through. They knew who he was. The briefing room was near the top floor, past rows of offices filled with intelligence officers hunched over glowing monitors. Bill had spent years in places like this, always being handed impossible missions by men in suits who would never see a battlefield. As he stepped inside, he spotted the other man in the room immediately. Lance Bean leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, his fatigues looking like they had been thrown on in a hurry, yet somehow he still carried himself with that cocky, unshaken confidence. Bill sighed. "Of course it's you." Lance smirked. "Miss me already?" Bill ignored him and moved toward the table at the center of the room, where a holographic display flickered with classified data. "What's the job?" Lance pushed off the wall and came to stand beside him. "No idea. They just told me to show up. Figured it had to be serious if they were dragging you out of retirement." Bill shot him a look. "I wasn't retired." Lance shrugged. "Looked like it from where I was standing." They had worked together plenty of times before, deep insertion ops, guerrilla warfare, the kind of missions most men didn't come back from. They made a good team, but they were far from friends. Lance was reckless, always pushing the limits, never one to take orders too seriously. Bill was disciplined, efficient, focused. They got the job done, but it was never smooth. Before Bill could fire back, the doors slid open, and General Graves stepped in, his face as hard as ever. Behind him, Defense Minister Albrecht and Dr. Kessler followed. "Take a seat, gentlemen," Graves said. "You're going to want to hear this." Bill and Lance exchanged a glance. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another mission. It was something bigger. General Graves didn't waste time. The moment Bill and Lance sat down, the room darkened, and the holographic display flickered to life. A rotating image of the Galuga archipelago appeared, an isolated stretch of islands in the South Pacific, now overlaid with a web of glowing red markers. "This is our target," Graves began, his voice as sharp as ever. "Satellite Recon picked up anomalous activity here over the last 72 hours. Structures that weren't there before, energy signatures off the charts." Then came the message. The hologram shifted, showing the scrambled transmission they had intercepted from Red Falcon. The distorted voice repeated its eerie warning. "We have been watching you. We are here. We are Red Falcon." Lance leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Great. Cryptic threats. So what, we just nuke the island and call it a day?" Dr. Kessler shook her head. "We don't even know the full extent of their forces yet. This isn't just about a single location, this could be the first wave of an invasion. If we wipe them out without understanding their capabilities, we could be walking into a much larger war." Lance raised an eyebrow, but kept his mouth shut. Tactics wasn't his strong suit. Bill studied the map, his jaw tightening. "So what's the plan?" Albrecht folded his hands. "You two are going in. Covert insertion. We need boots on the ground, intelligence on what we're dealing with, and if possible, eliminate the threat before it spreads." Lance let out a short laugh. "You're telling me the entire UEG military is putting this on us? 2 guys?" Graves' expression remained stone-cold. "You're not just 2 guys. You're Contras. You know what that means." Lance smirked. "Yeah, it means we do the impossible while everyone else watches." Bill ignored him and pointed to the hologram. "We insert here." Graves nodded. "Aerial drop at 0200. No reinforcements, no support, once you're in, you're on your own." Lance sat forward. "Hold up. We're just dropping in blind? No recon teams? No backup plan?" Bill shot him a glance. "You getting cold feet?" Lance rolled his eyes. No, I'm just not a fan of suicide missions. But if you want to run in and start shooting without knowing what we're dealing with, be my guest. Bill turned back to Graves. Stealth or shock and awe? Stealth, Kessler answered before Graves could. We need information first. If we send in the cavalry, we risk forcing their hand before we know their full strength. Bill nodded. Fine. We'll go quiet. Lance chuckled. Right. Because that's what we're known for. Bill shot him a look, but Graves ignored them both. You leave tonight. Get your gear in order. Gentlemen, you could very well be our last line of defense. Bill exhaled, already running the plan through his mind. It was dangerous, rushed, and almost guaranteed to go sideways. He knew they were holding something back, not telling them everything, but they never told them everything. Same old shit. Just another day in the life of a Contra. The low hum of the dropship's engines filled the cabin, steady and unrelenting. Red lights lined the interior, casting long shadows over the racks of gear and parachutes. Bill sat strapped into his seat, hands resting on his thighs, helmet hanging from the strap at his side. Across from him, Lance was doing the same, though his fingers tapped idly against the metal harness. They had been through this routine 100 times before, waiting, breathing, focusing. The silence before the storm. Bill exhaled and glanced across the cabin. So, what have you been up to? Lance looked up, one brow raised. Since when do you care? Bill shrugged. Since we're about to drop into hell together. Figured we could act like normal human beings for 5 minutes. Lance smirked but didn't answer right away. He leaned back, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. Been taking contracts. Some private security work. A couple of off-the-books jobs for people who pay in cash. He rolled his shoulders. Pays well. Less bullshit than the military. Bill nodded. He had expected something like that. Lance had always been the type to work outside the system, to do things his own way. You ever think about coming back? Lance scoffed. Back to what? More classified suicide missions? Command breathing down my neck? Nah, I like having options. Lance looked around the cabin. Not that I always have options. Bill held his gaze for a moment before looking away. Yeah. I get that. For a second, it almost seemed like they had found common ground. Then Lance leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. We can't kid ourselves, Rizer. Guys like us? We don't retire. We don't get normal lives. The second they need someone to do the dirty work, they call us. Bill didn't argue. He didn't have to. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Approaching drop zone. 30 seconds. Both men reached for their helmets, locking them into place. The red lights flickered to yellow, then green. The rear hatch whined as it lowered, revealing the dark expanse of the ocean below. Lance gave Bill a sideways glance. See you on the ground. And then they jumped. Chapter 2. Bill hit the ground in a crouch, knees bending to absorb the impact. The parachute rustled above him as it caught in the jungle canopy, its black fabric blending into the night. He unhooked the harness and dropped to one knee, rifle at the ready, scanning the dense foliage. Crickets chirped. Leaves rustled in the wind. No signs of movement. A few yards away, Lance landed just as smoothly, rolling into a kneeling position before cutting himself free. He gave a quick glance around before standing up and brushing dirt from his sleeve. Well, that was quiet. Almost too quiet. Bill sighed. You just had to say it, didn't you? Lance smirked, then Bill tapped his earpiece. Command, this is Contra 1. We're on the ground. No contact. Beginning recon. A moment later, Gray's voice crackled over their comms. Copy, Contra 1. Keep comms open, but maintain radio silence unless necessary. We don't know if they're monitoring frequencies. Understood, Bill replied. He did a quick check of his gear, rifle secured, sidearm holstered, extra magazines strapped tight. The jungle air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth and vegetation filling his lungs. A far cry from the sterile halls of Central Command. Lance adjusted his rifle strap and nudged Bill with his elbow. So, you want to take point, or do you need me to hold your hand? Bill rolled his eyes. I take point. That way, when you do something stupid, I can at least see it coming. Lance chuckled. Fair enough. With that, they moved forward, slipping into the shadows of the jungle, their boots silent against the soft earth. The mission had officially begun. The jungle stretched on, thick with tangled vines and towering trees, their canopies blotting out most of the moonlight. Bill and Lance moved cautiously, keeping their rifles at the ready. The only sounds were their own steady footsteps, the occasional distant hoot of an owl, and the whisper of the wind through the leaves. It was too quiet. Bill exhaled slowly, his instincts prickling. You notice something off? Lance nodded. Yeah. No patrols. No guards. If this place is crawling with Red Falcon, you'd think we'd have run into somebody by now. Bill didn't like it. A jungle this dense, this remote, should have been teeming with wildlife, birds, insects, something. Instead, the deeper they went, the more the silence pressed in. Then, a sound. A distant rumble, faint but distinct. Both men froze, heads tilting toward the noise. The unmistakable clatter of metal, the low growl of an engine, voices murmuring just out of sight. Bill signaled for Lance to follow as they crept toward the source, weaving through the underbrush until they reached the edge of a clearing. A small encampment lay ahead, nestled between thick trees. Makeshift floodlights cast long, eerie shadows over a handful of soldiers in dark uniforms. They moved with purpose, loading crates onto the back of 2 large trucks. Weapons, equipment, something sealed in heavy-duty containers. Lance narrowed his eyes. Well, looks like we found the welcoming committee. Bill studied the scene, his grip tightening on his rifle. Question is, what the hell are they packing up? Lance smirked. Only one way to find out. Before Bill could think of a plan, Lance was already moving. With a wolfish grin, he raised his rifle, lined up his shot, and squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack of gunfire split the night as his first round tore through the nearest soldier's chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. Bill's eyes widened. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Too late. The camp erupted into chaos. Soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting orders over the gunfire. A klaxon blared to life, its shrill alarm slicing through the jungle air. Bill gritted his teeth, raising his rifle as the first rounds zipped past. Damn it, Lance! Ever heard of stealth? Lance laughed as he squeezed off another burst. Stealth is for people who aren't outnumbered. Bill let out a frustrated growl but had no choice now. He jumped behind a fallen log as bullets kicked up dirt and debris around him. Popping up, he fired off a controlled burst, dropping 2 soldiers before rolling back into cover. Lance, on the other hand, fought like a man with no regard for personal safety, advancing between crates and vehicles, cutting down enemies with ruthless efficiency. Come on, Rizer! You're lagging behind. Bill cursed under his breath and sprinted forward, taking out another soldier as he moved. The camp was now fully alert, and more men poured in from the surrounding jungle. "Great," Bill muttered. "Fantastic." At this rate, they'd be knee-deep in bodies before they even figured out what Red Falcon was up to. Chapter 3. The jungle fell silent again, save for the faint crackling of a burning supply tent. The last shots had faded into the night, leaving only the heavy scent of gunpowder and blood. Bill exhaled sharply, stepping out from cover, his rifle still raised as he scanned the aftermath. Bodies lay scattered across the camp, every single enemy soldier cut down. "Damn it, Lance," Bill growled, shoving his rifle into its sling as he stomped forward. "Did you have to kill all of them?" Lance, casually ejecting an empty magazine and loading a fresh one, barely spared him a glance. "You saw how they fought. These guys weren't surrendering." "That's not the point," Bill snapped. "We could have grabbed one, squeezed them for intel." He gestured to the bodies. "Now all we got is a pile of corpses." Lance sighed, stretching his neck. "Yeah, well, interrogation's not really my thing." Bill muttered a curse under his breath. It was pointless arguing now, the damage was done. He ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, glancing around the camp. "Whatever. Let's at least figure out what they were moving." Lance was already ahead of him, hopping onto the bed of one of the trucks. He grabbed a crowbar from the side panel and jammed it under the lid of the nearest crate. With a grunt, he pried it open, the wood splintering as the lid clattered to the side. Inside, nestled in neat foam compartments, were sleek, gunmetal attachments, scopes, barrels, energy cells, all stamped with a symbol neither of them had ever seen before, but the origin was obvious. A blood-red falcon with outstretched wings. Red Falcon. Bill's stomach tightened. "Well, that's new." Lance whistled, picking up a rifle attachment and examining it. It was unlike any tech he'd seen before, smooth, almost alien in design. "These aren't standard issue. Hell, this isn't even black market quality." He rotated it in his hands, noting the lack of visible screws or seams. "Who the hell are these guys?" Bill frowned, reaching into the crate and lifting a bulky energy pack the size of his fist. It was warm to the touch, faintly pulsing with light. Lance glanced at him. "Think HQ knows about this?" Bill shook his head. "No way. If they did, they wouldn't have sent us." For the first time since landing, a feeling crept up Bill's spine that he didn't like. They were in deeper than they'd realized. Bill activated his comm, bringing a hand to his earpiece. "Command, this is Rizer. We've secured a hostile supply camp and found some." Boom! A burst of fire and light erupted behind him, the sudden explosion sending embers scattering into the night. Bill spun around, heart hammering, just in time to see Lance standing there, rifle raised, a stupid grin plastered across his face. "Whoa!" Lance exclaimed, staring at his weapon. "Now that is what I'm talking about." Bill blinked, his earpiece buzzing with static as Command tried to get his attention. He ignored it. "Lance, what the hell did you just do?" Lance lowered the rifle slightly, still admiring it. "I slapped one of those fancy attachments on, figured I'd see what it does." He gestured to a nearby tree, now reduced to a flaming, splintered stump. "Turns out? Way better than standard issue." Bill stomped over, shoving a hand against Lance's rifle and forcing it down. "You moron. We don't even know what this stuff is. What if it malfunctioned? What if it—" He glanced at the smoldering remains of the tree. "Jesus, what if that had been me?" Lance smirked. "Then I'd be carrying your crispy ass back to base." Bill ran a hand over his face, inhaling sharply. You don't just, he stopped himself, shaking his head. You know what? Forget it. He turned back to his comms, muttering under his breath. Lance gave the rifle one more approving glance before slinging it over his shoulder. Come on, Rizer, lighten up. We just got our hands on game changers. You really want to sit here complaining, or do you want to test out some more toys? Bill shot him a glare but didn't argue. Because as much as Lance's recklessness pissed him off, he wasn't wrong. Central Command was a storm of activity. Operators manned terminals, voices overlapping as data scrolled across screens. Red indicators blinked ominously on the holographic map hovering above the war room table, each one representing unknown activity in the jungle region. General Graves stood at the center of it all, arms crossed, his jaw clenched as he stared at the last fragmented transmission from Bill Rizer. Secured a hostile supply camp and found some. Then, static. No follow-up. No response to repeated hails. Still nothing. Graves asked, his voice sharp. A communications officer shook his head. Negative, sir. We had them for a moment, but the signal cut out. He adjusted his earpiece, typing commands into his console. It's possible the jungle's interfering with transmissions, or something's jamming them, Dr. Kessler interrupted, stepping forward. Her eyes flicked to the map. You said Rizer reported finding something. The officer hesitated. We only caught part of it. Something about securing the camp, and he scrolled through logs. Found some. But we lost them before he could clarify. Graves exhaled sharply. Great. He turned to another officer monitoring the broader satellite feed. Tell me you've got something. The technician frowned. Actually, we do. He tapped a section of the map, zooming in. We're detecting increased power surges in their sector. Energy signatures we don't recognize. Graves's expression darkened. Red Falcon? Can't confirm yet, but it's not standard military tech. The technician adjusted his readings. Sir, this stuff is big. And whatever it is, it wasn't there before Rizer and Bean made contact. Silence settled over the room for a beat. Graves glanced at Kessler. If Red Falcon has advanced weaponry, we need to know about it. Graves turned back to the comms officer. Keep trying to reach them. I want an update yesterday. The officer nodded, fingers flying over his keyboard. Graves exhaled, looking back at the map. Whatever was happening out there, Rizer and Bean were now in the middle of it. And Central Command had no way of knowing if they were still alive. Chapter 4. The jungle thickened as Bill and Lance pressed forward, the towering canopy swallowing what little moonlight managed to break through the clouds. The air was dense, heavy with the scent of damp earth and foliage. Every step was cautious, their senses sharpened, rifles ready. Then, through a break in the trees, they saw it. A massive concrete wall loomed ahead, stretching wide into the darkness. Mounted turrets lined its upper edge, their barrels sweeping the perimeter. Harsh floodlights illuminated the ground below, casting long, jagged shadows through the jungle's edge. And soldiers. Dozens of them. Patrolling in tight formations, manning gun nests, positioned along watchtowers. Bill crouched, raising a fist to signal Lance to stop. Lance knelt beside him, taking in the sight. He let out a low whistle. Well, that's more of what I was expecting. Bill narrowed his eyes. This wasn't some outpost or supply camp. This was a fortress. And by the sheer number of soldiers on watch, it was clear this place wasn't just important. It was critical to their operation, somehow. Lance shifted, resting his rifle on his knee. "So, what's the plan, big guy?" "Knock on the front door." Bill exhaled through his nose, scanning the defenses. "We need to get inside. But not through the main entrance." He pointed toward a section of the wall where the jungle thickened. "Less light coverage there. We wait for an opening, then move." Lance grinned. Now this is getting interesting. Bill wasn't sure interesting was the word he'd use. Because whatever Red Falcon was hiding behind that wall, it was something they didn't want anyone seeing. The plan lasted all of 10 seconds. Just as Bill was about to signal their approach, a blinding white beam cut through the darkness, locking onto them like a predator's gaze. Contact! 2 hostiles in the tree line. The jungle exploded with motion. Alarms blared. Soldiers scrambled into position. Turret motors whirred to life. Bill cursed. "Move!" Lance, instead of being rattled, grinned. Stealth's overrated. He raised his rifle and fired. The attachment roared to life, spewing a spread of flaming rounds that streaked through the air like meteors. The nearest patrol barely had time to react before they were caught in the barrage, their weapons flying as they went down. Bill shouldered his own rifle and squeezed the trigger. A piercing red laser shot forward, cutting a clean path through enemy ranks. Then the return fire came. But it wasn't standard ballistics. Bright, searing projectiles sliced through the air toward them, blue plasma bolts, streaking in rapid succession. A nearby tree trunk sizzled and blackened as a bolt tore through it, sending splinters flying. "Oh, hell," Bill muttered. "They're using the tech." Lance ducked behind cover, reloading. "Yeah, I like this stuff a lot less when it's aimed at me." A deep mechanical whir filled the air. Bill snapped his head up just in time to see the mounted turrets lock onto them. The barrels spun, glowing as they charged up. "Move!" The first turret unleashed a rapid burst of energy rounds, shredding the foliage where they'd just been. Bill and Lance barely managed to dive aside before the second turret opened fire, blasting craters into the ground. Bill gritted his teeth. They were pinned. Outnumbered. Outgunned. And they hadn't even reached the compound yet. Bill pressed his back against the dirt mound, gripping his rifle tight as energy bolts rained down around them. "We're pinned," he muttered, eyes scanning for an opening. "All right, here's the plan." But Lance was already gone. Damn it! Lance dashed into the open, rifle raised. His finger clenched the trigger, unleashing a relentless stream of flaming bullets. The mounted turrets took direct hits, sparks flying as fire engulfed their rotating mechanisms. Soldiers ducked and scrambled, their formations breaking under the chaos. Bill clenched his jaw. Reckless idiot. Then, Lance's gun sputtered. The flames flickered, then died. Click, click. Lance stared at the rifle in disbelief. "Oh, come on." He smacked the side of the weapon, jamming the trigger repeatedly. Nothing. The special attachment was spent. More soldiers flooded in, rifles raised. Bill cursed under his breath and sprinted forward. Lance was still smacking the gun. "Work, you stupid piece of..." "Lance, move!" Bill slammed into him just as a volley of energy blasts scorched the ground where he'd been standing. The two tumbled into cover, Bill landing hard on his shoulder. Lance groaned, rubbing his ribs. "You could have warned me." "I did warn you," Bill snapped. He ducked down and spotted a fallen soldier nearby, his rifle lying in the dirt. They had no choice now. Without hesitation, Bill snatched it up and tossed it to Lance. "Here. Swap the attachment." Lance caught the rifle, ripped off the spent flame module from his own weapon, and clicked the new one into place. He aimed at a distant patrol and fired. A streak of red light shot from the barrel, slicing through the air. The soldier barely had time to react before the laser cut him down. Lance frowned. Laser rounds, huh? He flexed his fingers around the grip. Man! I like the fire better. Bill shook his head. Just shoot, Lance. Lance sighed dramatically. Fine, fine. With their weapons ready, the two braced themselves. Bill and Lance pressed forward, their weapons spitting searing red streaks across the compound's defenses. The mounted turrets attempted to lock onto them, but the duo was already moving, darting between cover, firing in bursts. Lance took aim at one of the turrets and squeezed the trigger. The laser carved through its metal casing like a knife through butter. Sparks flew, and a second later, the entire turret erupted in a fiery explosion. Now that's what I'm talking about. Lance whooped. Bill, focused, fired at another turret, his shot striking deep into the mechanics. The weapon sputtered, twitched, and then detonated in a burst of shrapnel and flame. Chaos erupted along the wall as enemy soldiers scrambled to contain the destruction. Keep moving, Bill barked. They pressed on, cutting through patrols as they neared the massive metal door at the compound's entrance. Lance reached it first, slamming his fist against the cold steel. Lock tight. Not for long, Bill said, raising his rifle. Lance caught on immediately, stepping back. Together, they aimed their lasers at the thick door, carving through it like welders on overdrive. Molten metal dripped as their beams traced a rough, circular opening. The structure groaned under its own weight. Boom! The cutout chunk collapsed inward, landing with a deafening clang. Bill didn't wait. He charged through, rifle at the ready. Lance followed close behind. The moment they were inside, Bill turned, aimed at the upper hinges of the door frame, and fired. The remaining structure gave way, sending the rest of the door crashing down, sealing off the entrance behind them. No going back now, Lance said, rolling his shoulders. Wouldn't have it any other way, Bill replied. They turned to face the unknown depths of the compound, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 5. The corridor stretched ahead of them, silent and empty. Dim overhead lights cast long, flickering shadows against the metal walls. Bill and Lance slowed their pace, scanning for movement. Nothing. The only sound was their own breathing. They reached a set of heavy, locked doors. No console, no keypad, just reinforced steel, thick enough that even their weapons wouldn't punch through easily. Bill exhaled and leaned back against the wall. Looks like we're not getting through that without a key. Lance sighed, rolling his shoulders before plopping down on the cold metal floor. Looks like we caught them by surprise, they don't have their troops together. Might as well take 5. Bill hesitated, then lowered himself beside him. Both men rested their rifles across their laps, catching their breath. Lance pulled his spent weapon attachment off with a grunt and held it up to the dim light. The casing was scorched, a faint wisp of smoke curling from where it had overheated. Well, that was fun while it lasted. He tossed it aside, letting it clatter across the floor. Bill did the same with his, watching as it bounced once and skidded to a stop. Tech's no good if it burns out in a firefight. Yeah, tell that to the guys who designed it. Lance rubbed the back of his neck. Guess we're back to the basics. Bill ran a hand along his rifle, nodding. Worked well enough before. Lance smirked. Speak for yourself. I was just getting used to setting people on fire. Bill gave him a dry look. Yeah, real subtle. A brief silence passed between them. The distant hum of the facility's power systems filled the void. Lance tapped his fingers against his knee. "You ever get the feeling something's off?" Bill glanced at him. "Like what?" Lance gestured toward the corridor. "We just blew a hole through their front door, wiped out their perimeter, and walked into their base, and there's still nobody here." Bill's expression darkened. He had noticed it too. Either they're regrouping, or they want us in here. Lance exhaled, rolling his neck. "Well, that's not ominous at all." Bill pushed himself up, gripping his rifle. "Break's over." Lance groaned as he stood. "Figures." He stretched, cracking his knuckles before gripping his own weapon. The sudden blare of sirens shattered the silence. Red emergency lights pulsed along the walls, painting the corridor in eerie, flickering shadows. Bill and Lance snapped their weapons up just as the heavy steel doors groaned and slid open. Beyond them lay a vast, cavernous chamber, pitch black except for the warning lights flashing in rhythmic bursts. They stepped inside cautiously, rifles sweeping across the room. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and oil, and the faint hum of machinery vibrated beneath their boots. "Not creepy at all," Lance muttered. Bill's eyes adjusted to the darkness. The chamber was massive, too big to make out the far walls. The only visible features were thick cables snaking along the floor and the occasional glint of metal reflecting the emergency lights. Then, movement. Bill's instinct screamed at him, and he barely managed to push Lance aside before a searing ring of fire shot down from above, scorching the floor where they had stood. They rolled into cover behind a thick steel console, weapons raised. "What the hell was that?" Lance barked. Bill didn't answer. His gaze flicked upward, following the glow of red warning lights. And then he saw it. A massive mechanical eye loomed high above them, suspended from the ceiling by a network of thick cables and metal arms. It swiveled, locking onto their position, its glowing iris pulsing with an eerie, unnatural light. "Tell me that's just a security camera," Lance said. The eye pulsed again. Another ring of fire shot toward them, forcing them to dive in opposite directions. Bill gritted his teeth. "I don't think cameras usually shoot at people." Lance fired a burst toward it, but the rounds ricocheted harmlessly off its metallic shell. "Great. Now what?" Bill narrowed his eyes. The tech was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Way too advanced. He tightened his grip on his rifle. "We take it down. Fast." The eye pulsed again, preparing another barrage. Lance smirked. "Now you're speaking my language." The mechanical eye pulsed again, but this time, something else happened. A series of sharp metallic clicks echoed through the chamber as panels slid open along the ceiling and walls. Bill and Lance tensed, gripping their rifles. Drones. Sleek, spherical machines hovered into view, their red sensor lights flickering as they zeroed in on their targets. Each one had a mounted energy weapon, and in an instant, they unleashed a barrage of laser fire. "Figures," Lance muttered as he dove behind a console, barely avoiding a blast. Bill was already moving, firing precise bursts into the drones. One exploded, sending shrapnel clattering across the metal floor. Lance rolled out from cover, unloading his rifle into another cluster. "I hate drones." "Would you rather more turrets?" Bill asked dryly, dodging another shot. Lance grinned. "Touché." The drones kept coming, their movements quick and unpredictable. Bill shifted his aim, squeezing off controlled shots at the exposed joints between their armor plating. 2 more went down in sparks. Lance, meanwhile, took a different approach. He aimed for the thick cables snaking along the ceiling, connecting the eye to the rest of the facility. He fired, cutting through one. A shower of sparks rained down as the machinery groaned. "Bingo," Lance said, grinning. "We kill its power, we kill it." Bill nodded. "Keep at it." They both focused fire on the cables and the surrounding computer systems. The room flashed with each explosion as vital components burst apart under the assault. The mechanical eye flickered, its movements becoming sluggish. Its energy pulse began charging again, but the glow faltered. Lance fired at the last thick cable holding it up. The shot connected, and with a final groan of metal, the eye detached, sparking wildly as it crashed to the ground. Bill barely had time to yell, "Move," before the entire structure detonated in a fiery explosion. The blast wave sent them both diving forward, sprinting toward the opposite side of the chamber. The heavy steel door ahead of them stood partially open, and they barely managed to squeeze through before the explosion roared behind them, sending debris flying. They landed hard on the other side, coughing from the smoke and heat. Lance rolled onto his back, exhaling. Well, that was fun. Bill pushed himself up, scanning their surroundings. "We're still in enemy territory." Lance smirked, patting his rifle. "Then let's give them a show." Without another word, they pressed forward. Chapter 6. Bill and Lance moved through the corridors of the base with precision, cutting down enemy troops as they advanced. The facility was a maze of dimly lit halls and reinforced doors, but they pushed forward, weapons blazing. The explosions behind them spreading and slowly approaching. Lance kicked open a door, firing a burst at the soldiers inside. One went down immediately, another staggered back, and the last dropped his rifle, raising his hands in surrender. Bill stepped forward, rifle trained on the captive. "You! Down on your knees." The soldier obeyed, his expression eerily calm. He didn't even seem afraid. Lance leaned in, inspecting the man with a smirk. "Gotta say, not the reaction I was expecting. Most guys would be pissing themselves right about now." Bill crouched down, gripping the soldier's collar. "Who are you? Who do you work for?" The man blinked slowly, his gaze distant. "We serve Red Falcon." "We are Red Falcon." Bill frowned. "You are Red Falcon." The soldier's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "Red Falcon is everything." Lance gave Bill a look. "Well, that's not ominous." Bill tightened his grip. "What's your mission? What's the objective here?" The soldier's smile widened, his pupils dilating. "You will see. Soon." Before either of them could react, the soldier tensed, then, without hesitation, slammed his head backward into the floor with brutal force. The sickening crack echoed through the room. Bill let go as the body went limp. Lance cursed under his breath. "Well, that was helpful," Lance muttered, standing up. "Brainwashed or just crazy?" Bill exhaled. "Maybe both." He checked his rifle. The floor rumbled with the encroaching explosions as the base slowly ate itself. "Come on. We need to keep moving." They exited the base through a reinforced side door, emerging into open air. The night was thick with jungle humidity, the scent of wet earth and vegetation surrounding them. Ahead of them stretched a massive cliffside. A roaring waterfall cascaded down from above, mist rising in the moonlight. Lance stepped forward, whistling. "Hell of a view." Bill studied the landscape below. "We need to find a way up." Bill stood at the base of the cliff, peering down at the jungle far below. The waterfall thundered beside them, mist rising into the humid night air. The only other way forward was a winding path along the rock face, but it was narrow and exposed. Lance crossed his arms. "So, what's the plan, fearless leader? We climbing, or are we taking the scenic route? Bill tapped his earpiece, frowning. First, I'm calling this in. Static. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. Still nothing. Lance smirked. Yeah, let me guess. No signal. Bill sighed, lowering his hand. Might get a better one if we get higher. Lance raised an eyebrow. Oh, so we are climbing. Great. Love a good workout after nearly getting fried by a giant robot eye. Bill ignored him, slinging his rifle over his back and moving toward the rocky surface. Let's move. Lance rolled his shoulders. All right. But if I fall, you're catching me. Bill grabbed hold of a handhold and pulled himself up. Not a chance. Lance chuckled and followed. The climb had begun. The rock face was slick, rough in some places and treacherously smooth in others. Bill led the way, his grip firm as he pulled himself higher, boots pressing against narrow footholds. Lance followed just below, muttering to himself as water from the waterfall sprayed across them, making the climb even harder. Bill reached for a ledge when a loose rock suddenly gave way under his fingers. His heart lurched as his grip faltered, but he quickly caught himself on another hold. Damn it, he muttered. Below, Lance smirked. Don't fall, big guy. I can't carry your heavy ass back up. Bill scowled. Just climb. Lance was about to fire back when a sharp crack rang out, followed by a bullet chipping the rock inches from his hand. Up, Bill? We got company. Bill glanced down. The base was now swarming with enemy troops, some of them scrambling onto the cliffside, others staying back to fire up at them. Muzzle flashes flickered in the dark, bullets sparking against the rock. Keep moving. Bill barked, pulling himself up faster. Lance swung to the side, flattening himself against the rock as rounds whizzed past. Easier said than done. Another burst of gunfire tore through the air. A rock exploded near Bill's face, forcing him to shield his eyes. Below, Lance drew his pistol and fired downward, picking off one of the soldiers climbing toward them. The body tumbled back into the darkness, but more were on their way. We gotta do something about those guys before they make this climb even worse, Lance grunted, trying to reposition. Bill gritted his teeth. He spotted a large outcropping just ahead. If they could make it up there, they'd have a better angle to fight back. There! He pointed. We hold them off from that ledge. Lance nodded, gripping the rocks tightly. Race you to the top. Just don't get shot. Together, they climbed faster, bullets chasing them up the cliffside. Bill pulled himself over the edge of the cliff and immediately spun around, reaching down to help Lance up. Bullets whizzed past them from below as enemy soldiers still fired upward, their muzzle flashes blinking like fireflies in the dark. Move! Bill ordered, yanking Lance onto solid ground. They sprinted toward cover, a small, squat building near the cliff's edge. It was unlike the jungle base below. No military markings, no windows, just smooth metal plating and a massive, sealed door. Lance pressed against the structure, catching his breath. What the hell is this? No idea, Bill muttered, checking his rifle. But I don't like it. Before they could process any further, the ground shook. A low, guttural sound rumbled through the air. Then they saw it. Rising from behind the building, its massive form casting a grotesque shadow in the moonlight, was something neither of them had ever seen before. A monstrous head, sickly pale, covered in ridges and chitinous plating. Its lidless, pulsating red eyes locked onto them, and from either side of its head, two long, sinewy tentacle arms unfurled. Lance's breath hitched. Oh, hell no. The creature let out a shriek, and without warning, its tentacles shot forward, launching massive flaming energy bolts toward them. Bill and Lance jumped apart as the blast struck the ground, erupting in searing explosions. Heat washed over them, sending waves of fire licking at their boots. Bill rolled, bracing his rifle and opening fire. The bullets barely dented the creature's thick hide. Lance fired as well, but the beast didn't even flinch. "You seeing this? It's like it doesn't even care we're shooting it." The creature raised one tentacle, and a crackling sphere of energy formed at its tip before it hurled it forward. Bill barely had time to leap aside as the blast struck where he'd been standing, leaving behind a smoldering crater. "We need to find a weak spot," Bill barked, ducking behind a boulder for cover. "Yeah? Where?" Lance shouted in panicked tones, reloading his weapon. The monstrous head loomed over them, its red eyes glowing ominously. Another tentacle slammed into the ground, nearly crushing Lance as he barely rolled out of the way. "This is not what I signed up for," Lance yelled. Bill gritted his teeth. "What the hell are we even fighting?" For the first time since the mission started, neither of them had an immediate answer. Bill's mind raced as he ducked behind the boulder, sweat dripping down his forehead despite the cool jungle night. The beast was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, its sheer resilience, its grotesque anatomy, the way it shrugged off their bullets like they were nothing. He needed a plan. "Keep moving," he barked, sprinting from cover as another fiery blast turned his previous position into a smoldering pit. Lance was already running, weaving side to side as the creature's tentacles slammed into the ground, sending dirt and rock flying. "We're running out of room, Bill. We need a way to hit this thing where it hurts." Bill's eyes flicked over the battlefield. Their standard bullets were useless. The only thing remotely powerful had been those energy attachments, and they had already burnt out. His gaze snapped back to the creature's tentacle, watching as another ball of crackling fire formed at its tip. It wasn't just launching attacks, it was producing them. "That's the key." "Lance!" Bill shouted, dodging another blast. "Those energy bolts, it's making them somehow. If we can disrupt that process, we might be able to turn its own weapon against it." Lance ducked behind a rock, breathing hard. "And how do you expect us to do that?" Bill didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as another energy bolt formed, growing from a swirling, molten core to a fully formed sphere, glowing with pulsating reds and oranges. As it launched toward him, he noticed something, the briefest delay between the charge and the release, when the sphere was at its most volatile. "There. Shoot the damn thing before it hits us," he ordered. Lance blinked. "You want me to shoot a fireball?" "Just do it." Lance muttered something under his breath, then steadied his aim as another bolt hurtled toward them. He squeezed the trigger. His shot hit dead center. The energy sphere detonated in midair, sending a wave of force and flames outward. The blast knocked both of them back, but the creature recoiled too, its massive head lurching slightly at the unexpected explosion. Bill's eyes widened. It worked. Lance groaned, pushing himself up. "Okay, that was way too close for comfort." Bill grabbed his arm and yanked him up. "Do it again, but closer to the damn thing." Lance gave him a wide-eyed look. "Oh sure, let me just ask it to throw one right where we need it." But as if on cue, another bolt formed at the creature's tentacle. It launched toward them, and this time, Lance was ready. He steadied his aim, adjusted for timing, and fired. The shot connected, but the explosion still wasn't close enough. The creature flinched, but not enough to do any real damage. "We need to be faster," Bill muttered, his mind clicking through scenarios like gears turning in a machine. He looked up at the creature's gaping maw, at the way its tentacles seemed to pause before launching another attack. Inside its mouth, he realized. Lance gave him a sharp look. "Excuse me." The next shot, we set it off inside its mouth. Lance stared at him, then looked up at the creature. "Oh, that's insane. It's our best shot." Lance sighed, shaking his head. "I hate that you always sound so confident when you say this crap." The creature roared, its massive jaw opening wide as it prepared another strike. Bill steadied his rifle. "Now!" A flaming bolt launched toward them. Lance lined up the shot, every muscle in his body tense. He exhaled sharply and pulled the trigger. The explosion was instantaneous. A firestorm erupted inside the creature's mouth, sending shockwaves through its grotesque body. It reared back, shrieking in agony, smoke and fire bursting from its throat. Bill and Lance didn't stop to admire their work. They ran. The beast's death throes shook the ground behind them as it collapsed, its tentacles twitching violently before finally going still. They didn't turn back until the jungle had gone eerily silent. Lance exhaled, lowering his rifle. We did it." Bill nodded slowly, watching the smoldering remains. And for the first time since this mission started, a cold certainty settled in his gut. Whatever they were up against, it wasn't just a rogue military faction. This was something else entirely. Chapter 7. Bill tapped at his communicator, frustration tightening his jaw. The static-filled crackle in his earpiece wasn't promising. He adjusted the antenna, trying to angle it toward the sky, but all he got was more distortion. Come on. This high up, we should be getting something," he muttered. Nothing. Lance paced a few feet away, his hands twitching at his sides. His breathing had grown uneven, his usual cocky bravado gone. He ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath. This ain't right, Bill." Bill sighed, still fiddling with the communicator. "Yeah, no kidding. The signal's worse than before." "No, this," Lance gestured sharply to the charred remains of the creature, smoke still curling from its ruined maw. "That thing was not human. We just shot a giant, laser-spewing alien in the face. That's not some high-tech experiment, that's some outer space shit, man." Bill clenched his jaw, lowering the communicator. "We don't know what it was." Lance let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, come on. What, you think some rogue military outfit just built that thing? Like some kind of pet project?" Bill didn't answer. Lance's breathing quickened. He turned, hands on his hips, staring out over the jungle below. "We shouldn't be here. We're not equipped for this. Hell, we're not even trained for this. What if there's more of them? What if—" Lance didn't seem to hear him. "What if this isn't just one base? What if there's a whole army of these things? What if they're already on Earth?" Lance spun back to him, his eyes wide, his breath uneven. For the first time since Bill had met him, he looked genuinely rattled. Bill stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You need to pull it together." Lance shook his head. "You don't get it, man. I've seen movies. I know how this stuff goes. They wipe out the weak first. They move in, infiltrate, take over." Bill grabbed his shoulder. "We are not in a movie. We are here, in the jungle, in the middle of a mission. And I need you to focus." Lance pulled away, shaking his head. No, you don't get it. This whole thing, this is exactly the kind of nightmare I've had since I was a kid, Bill. You know why I never signed up for deep space ops? Because I don't want to be one of those guys who gets torn apart by something that shouldn't even exist. Bill exhaled slowly, his frustration cooling slightly as he studied Lance's expression. The bravado, the recklessness, it had all been a cover, hadn't it? Bill had seen plenty of soldiers with fears they buried under cocky smiles and impulsive decisions. But fear of extraterrestrials? That was a new one. Bill sighed, adjusting his rifle. Look, I get it. This wasn't in the playbook. But right now, we don't have time to lose our heads over what we just fought. We need to move. Find a better signal. Get word to command. Lance looked at him, jaw tight, still breathing hard. Bill softened his tone. I need you with me on this. Lance rubbed a hand over his face. He let out a slow breath, then finally nodded. Yeah, okay. Bill gave him a firm nod, then turned back toward the strange building. The jungle was quiet now. Too quiet. Whatever they were up against, this was just the beginning. Inside the command center, tension hung in the air like a thick fog. The massive war room was dimly lit, banks of monitors casting a cold glow over the gathered officers. General Graves stood at the center, arms crossed, his sharp eyes fixed on the scrambled transmission flickering across the main screen. Don't get it, man. This whole thing, this is exactly the kind of nightmare I've had since I was a kid, Bill. Lance's voice crackled through the static-filled comms, erratic and panicked. The room remained silent as everyone listened. You know why I never signed up for deep space ops? Because I don't want to be one of those guys who gets torn apart by something that shouldn't even exist. The transmission crackled. Some of the officers exchanged uncertain glances. Then, Bill's voice cut through, sharper, more controlled. Lance, I need you to focus. A few more garbled words, then nothing but static. The communications officer frantically worked at his controls, trying to re-establish the connection. That's all we got, sir. Signal's gone completely dead. General Graves exhaled slowly. Can we pinpoint their location? We've got their last known coordinates, but we can't track them in real time, another officer responded. Something's interfering with our satellite feeds. Jamming tech, most likely. Graves rubbed his chin, his mind working through the possibilities. Can we confirm this is alien tech? Unconfirmed, sir, the intelligence officer replied. But if the enemy has technology capable of jamming our comms at this range, they're more advanced than we anticipated. One of the tactical advisors shook his head. That transmission? Lance was terrified. Something spooked him bad. And Rizer was keeping him in line, Graves noted. Means they're still operational. He turned toward the table at the center of the room, where a holographic display mapped out their last known position. But we need to assume they've encountered something beyond conventional enemy forces. A murmur spread through the officers. It was the unspoken question hanging over them all. What exactly had they run into? Orders, sir, one of the officers asked. Graves took a long moment before responding. We stay the course. If we tip our hand too early, we risk exposing our entire operation. For now, we wait for another transmission. If they can move, they'll check in. Chancellor Everett suddenly entered. We can't rely on the Contras to get this done, General. We don't know what we're up against, and if diplomacy isn't an option. Graves raised an eyebrow. Prepare to deploy a nuclear attack on the island. We know what they have now, let's blow it all. Graves turned in alarm. Sir, are you sure? You'll have some explaining to do suddenly nuking an island. "This is for the world, General," the Chancellor replied before turning away, a solemn look on his face. "Just do it." The General nodded. The room fell silent. It wasn't the answer anyone wanted, but it was the only option they had. In the cold glow of the monitors, the static continued to hiss.